question.
Well, we live on Woods Creek Road, and I was really concerned because underneath our bridge, there was a huge log jam. And they were all really excited, you know, because this log jam was there and it was doing all these things for the fish. And I happened to be sick during that flood thing and all that jazz, and Roman came up and he said, well, you don't have to worry about the log jam. The log jam isn't there anymore. And what concerned me, and we talked to them about that, was, you know, our bridge is high up, but a lot of the people down below us, I don't know, I mean, their bridges are low. And it concerned me because those logs going down, there could have been great deal of damage to the people below us.
Well,
You know, God has a way of straightening these things.
well, yeah, and it's really interesting. And of course, the behavior of a log going downstream is very different if it's going down lengthwise or crosswise. And when it gets hung up under a bridge and forms a jam, then it becomes a dam as well. But most of these jams leak. And so most of the stream can go through the jam, and you'll wind up with an obstruction there without a flood. But if you get a lot of fine material piled up behind those, then it becomes a dam, and you have a problem. And you move bridges and do all kinds of neat things, but probably the most important thing is that what it does is it redirects the stream, it cuts a new channel someplace else. And a number of years ago, I had a contract to do some stream work in Northern California. It was in the fall of 1996. Remember a 96 storm? Okay. Soda Creek is just south of Shasta City. And I did a stream survey in the whole township that was draining Soda Creek. And I labeled logs and counted them and where the pools and the riffles and all that sort of stuff was. And 2 weeks later, that storm hit. And I finished my contract, put in my report and all this kind of stuff. But I got really curious as to what happened to that stream. So I took an assistant and went down there again, and we reread the streams here. We found, it was fascinating. We had the same number of logs, but there were different logs. And the same number of pools in different places. And the stream was intact, but totally different. There were some new channels. I was absolutely dumbfounded. That isn't supposed to happen. All these things that are permanent are not.
So maybe that's the definition of natural then.
Not permanent.
Yeah, right. That's probably, you got it, Jerry.
That's right.
You're elected.
Thank you.
That's why I also asked about sustainable.
Yeah, well, that means there's a new tax.
Well, may I comment a little bit? I have a special thing about sustainability. The green organizations have lobbied for a complete withdrawal of the national forest system from being harvested, which is why, and so if you back off from that a little bit and say, well, what are they sustaining? Well, we're sustaining the old growth. It'll never be replaced again. Okay. What is the old growth out there? Well, we got those great big Douglas fir that we like to go out and hug. And I say, have you walked around in those forests? Like, oh yeah, I love it. I just live to be out there. I said, how much regeneration do you see of Douglas fir? I don't know, I didn't notice. Well, go back and look. Douglas fir cannot survive in its own shade. So if you're not harvesting, you're going to lose the prime species in this region. Period. End of discussion. And I've just spent over $1 million of government money studying what happens if you try to regenerate these older stands, to try to make them look like old growth from second growth. Buddy, it don't happen. You can get hemlock to grow under there. What happens? Hemlock inherits the world. And so then the other thing is there were clear cuts up until 20 years ago, and they planted, and that was nice regeneration, lots of nice young stands out there. I said, what happens if you don't cut those? Oh, they'll grow to be old growth, and then we'll have all the old growth we want. And I say, well, does any animals live in the clear cuts? Oh, they'll all be on private land. We don't care. And I said, but the law says that the National Forest System has to maintain all the species that were there once. Oh, well, the heck with that. That's not sustainable. Anyway, so you got to define sustainability in some realistic ways, or you can't win an argument. You can't win a political ballot if enough people have the wrong idea. You can make it the right idea. That is one of those things that we know that it is. So
The other thing I've heard, and I'd have to verify this, maybe you can verify it, is that old growth doesn't really convert the carbon dioxide to the oxygen that new growth does. Now, this is something Rush Limbaugh said. He's not a botanist or a chemist, and I just wanted you to verify or dispute with him.
I won't try to verify anything, because to deal with this is a system that's in flux all the time. But if you've got a green canopy of foliage up there, it's going to take in about so much carbon dioxide per day, year-round, in winter, summer, and you've got about that much production of organic matter taking place.
Mm-hmm.
And if you cut it down completely and start over, well, within a year you've got a green landscape. You know, all the herbs and weeds and brush and so forth take off, unless Mike Newton comes along and sprays it. And then only for a year or so, and then it leaps back into motion. The resiliency of these ecosystems is amazing. You can't kill a production system for very long. And that's what people simply don't forget. If people talk about carbon sequestration, that begins with a new clear cut, and for the first 150 years or so, it's about a constant. I've been charting the growth of stands from 70 to 150 years, and it's just almost a flat line. It's accumulating carbon in all those years, and that will continue until trees start to crowd and kill each other off, and they fall down, and then those rotten wood is decaying and oxidizing, and then at about 250 years, what you have is a break-even, where the green absorption of carbon dioxide is balanced by the carbon dioxide that's coming off of respiration of the dead stuff.
Okay.
So it's a long cycle, but it's a long flat top in it.
Another misconception is these second growth trees will never be an old growth. And old growth is a different species. Like if you have a Gravenstein apple tree and a wine sap apple. They're both apple trees, but they're not the same. Old growth is different wood, different bark. It's different.
Yeah, well, see, you're right.
And I've seen it all my life.
You ought to be a teacher, because you
No.
can probably sell that.
No, I've been a logger. I've just seen it. I know what I'm looking at.
No.
And I know what I was taught.
Yeah, and that's a good observation. And there's as I say, so many things we know that ain't so. Yes?
I gotta ask a question. I didn't have any clue how to answer it. How much effect does kinetic energy have in stream movement as far as temperature?
As far as?
Temperature. Because movement and kinetic energy produces heat.
Well, something that's perched has potential energy, and when it falls, it releases kinetic energy.
Right.
Okay? So when water goes through a penstock or through a turbine, it generates electric power. It loses potential energy, it becomes horsepower.
Yeah.
And when a tree accumulates biomass, it's accumulating a tremendous amount of potential energy, because if it's combusted, it will release all that with an enormous amount of heat.
Yeah.
So does that exchange help? Maybe you.
Well, they're talking about, they were wondering, because stream movement, it picks a piece up, a stick up here, it drags around, every time it hits something and drags, that's creating kinetic energy.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, and not only that, the water itself has some viscosity too.
Right, and then it also
And it takes energy for it to stir itself.
Yeah, I think what he's referring to is probably what we would call viscous heating in the water. And from what I recall from fluid mechanics, that's not a very large contribution. I'd have to look that up. You're talking about,
It's not. The hydraulic gradient is a much more potent source of energy than the friction from
Yeah.
viscosity. But that is virtually, when a stream goes down a mountain, the only thing that keeps it from racing down is stirring itself. And the viscosity of the water is absorbing that heat, and it is imparting energy and heat energy to the stream. And if you were to take a heavyweight oil and put an electric beater in it and stir it for a while, it'd warm up quite a few degrees. And from heavy oil would become thin oil because it was warming. That's the same principle.
yeah. But I don't think that's a very large contribution considering others. I'd have to,
It's not.
yeah, I'd have to check that out. It's been a little
But
while.
if you ever go out into the
Since I-
woods in the wintertime, you will find open patches that aren't frozen over.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where the water's running fast. And I suspect that what you're getting is an equilibration between the heat of hydraulic conductivity here versus the heat that's cooking off to the very cold air that
Yeah.
transfers.
It depends on how much it holds and how much it dissipates. I'm not really sure how to answer this question before. All he asked me was what I asked you. And I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and the winter stream is an interesting place to look at heat exchange because it should freeze.
I think partly is that I'd have to look into that a little bit further. Also, partly it's because it comes from a warm source, and as it flows, it may not have the time to freeze immediately. The viscous heating still there may not have as much of an effect, but I'd have to check into this.
I'm sure you're right.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're right. And, it depends on the temperature difference between air and water at the surface as to whether the ice moves in or
Yeah.
moves away. And so that's sort of the throttle on the system.
Yeah. So the faster it moves, if it comes from a source here that's above freezing, the faster it moves from here to its outlet,
Right.
it has less time to cool off just because it's exposed to the air
sure.
for a shorter period of time. That's what I'm thinking could be the
Well,
situation.
you have the turbulence effect too. The water's a pretty stable mass. The whole, your surface is a small percentage, and the turbulence is keeping it, if you go to an average temperature, even if the surface starts to freeze, it's being totally mixed.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You could have quite a series of differential equations trying to figure that out.
Yeah. I haven't ever really considered that in any great detail. I'd like to sometime,
Yeah.
but I just
Yeah.
You
haven't.
weren't studying freezing in the coast range, because it doesn't happen like that.
That's right. I grew up in Vermont, and streams do freeze in Vermont.
I mean, what you're saying is they freeze completely. They freeze solid.
We used to drive our truck out on the ice to get ice for our ice house.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I can believe that.
Thank you so much. I could listen to you for all the time. You can come back and speak to us anytime you want.